Just. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the MICAS International Art Weekend. It is now time for our panel discussion, moderated by MICAS Artistic Director Edith Devani, a discussion which will focus on preserving the past and programming for the future. I will leave it in your good hands to introduce who we will have on the panel today. After the panel discussion, which will take around about 30 minutes, we will open the floor for around 10 minutes for questions and answers from the panelists. So, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with our minds still buzzing from the wealth of information and thought-provoking insights into art institutions and centres, which Timothy Rubb delivered in his fascinating lecture, Preserving the Past, Programming for the Future, we intend on this panel to pick up some of the themes in our discussion, or at least use them as a launching pad, as we further consider the role of museums or not-for-profit institutions, their relationship to and responsibility towards the local and global populations. And we'll interrogate these themes from a range of differing, wider artistic community perspectives, and specifically consider MICAS and Malta's eventual position within this ecology. So to do this, we have assembled a distinguished panel, each of whom will bring a particular viewpoint and experience to this discussion. So I now introduce them. Conrad Shawcross, an artist working mainly in the discipline of sculpture, who is, of course, the main art focus of this international weekend. And as has been mentioned before, his work was unveiled last night on the MICAS campus and is absolutely wonderful. And we hope that many of you have already seen this powerful display. And if not, we do urge you to check our website for future tour details. It's really not to be missed. Imbued with an appearance of scientific rationality, Conrad's sculpture explores subjects that lie in the borders of geometry and philosophy, physics and metaphysics, with a sense of scientific rationality running through them. And although his work depends on modern engineering technologies, he has adopted a rather, I hesitate to say out-of-date practice of running his own workshop or production studio, which I think is kind of a remarkable thing for our time. And I say sort of out-of-date, not in a, not in any criticism, but I think it's just really, really unusual, fascinating and positive and very unusual now. And in his studio, he does everything. He conceives, plans, tests, produces all of his work with a very small team, but he oversees every aspect of the process. His work can be found in major collections and has been exhibited worldwide. And I should add that Conrad is a Royal Academician of the Academy in London, which is where we first met, but it's very pertinent to this exhibition because to this discussion, because the Academy is another model of an arts institution which is effectively artist run. So he, like all academicians, are duty-bound to take turns serving on the Governing Council and its various committees. Dr. Georgina Portelli has been part of MICAS from the very start, and we have hugely benefited from her considerable experience and passion for creativity and contemporary art. She serves as Deputy Chair of the MICAS Board and is Chair of our Education Committee. With a PhD in psychology, her speciality is concept formation, language representation, and multilingualism. She has worked across the cultural and creative sectors as a policy advisor. Her current work focuses on diaspora and memory studies, culture for social inclusion, sponsorship for the arts, and the forging of creative partnerships between art, science, and other disciplines. Waqas Wajahat, who is of course now chair of the MICAS International Committee, is a collector, curator, and art dealer who works closely with museums, artists, and artist estates to organize and produce exhibitions. His early career was in museum curating following the study of art history at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. His earlier education was in Pakistan, the country of his birth. He moved from the museum sector into the private sector, but has continued to focus on legacy projects benefiting museums, artists, and artist estates, and has acquired much experience in developing relationships between private entities and public sector museums. His commitment to not-for-profit museums has seen him serve on the boards and committees of many of America's august institutions, including the Philadelphia Museum, the Barnes Foundation, the Norton Museum, and the Menil Drawing Institute. He's also a very serious collector, focusing on post-war and contemporary art, in particular from women artists, as well as Mughal and Rajput period paintings. Mm-hmm. And we welcome back, of course, our keynote speaker, Timothy Rubb, who is now on our international committee. And Phyllis Muscat, our chair, has already given a good outline of Timothy's remarkable career, so he requires no further introduction from me. But I just want to add that his distinguished career as a museum leader has always been underpinned by a formidable knowledge and passion for art and a considerable enthusiasm for working with contemporary artists. So given the range and experience on the panel, I'm hoping to cover a wide-ranging discussion covering areas such as the artist's relationship to museums and not-for-profit galleries, how public arts institutions can work successfully with the commercial sector, the role and responsibility of instigating an education program to support the exhibition program, and how the role of arts institutions and our expectations of them are constantly evolving, which is something, of course, that Timothy mentioned many times during his talk, and the particular challenges that come with this. So having listed all of these topics, I'm sure we'll go off in many different directions with this very rich subject, and I will leave time at the end for questions from the floor. But I wanted to start with a very general question, kind of pitched to all of you, and be interested in your kind of differing responses. And mentioning an architect that Timothy mentioned in his talk, Frank Gehry, I'm kind of thinking of the Bilbao effect, which is the extent to which the Bilbao Museum, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, which is now, I think, 25 years old, when it arrived on the scene, it lifted a city that was very much down in its fortunes into a cultural hub, with the new museum being the center of this renewed energy. But in a more subtle sense, I wondered what your collective thoughts were as to how new cultural projects can have the effect of altering outside perceptions of the community or place where they're located, what this means for the relationship between the institution and its community, and of course how this might be applied to MICAS. So I wonder who wanted to, maybe Georgina, do you want to start by just giving us your thoughts on this?
Okay. I think certainly Malta is nothing like Bilbao. I mean, it's, we have a heavily contested physical space and social space. MICAS is very close to Valletta. It's the foot traffic to Valletta is enormous. It has, it's a cultural hub. However, I mean, we do have these areas that are in great need of regeneration, and of course for the public to claim them back. So I think MICAS certainly is moving. I think one of the intrinsic motivation for creating a space like MICAS is the democratization of space, and for the public to enjoy these spaces and make a meaningful experience for a space that has been out of the public eye for over 60 years. So I think that's the first point. Secondly, I think spaces that have, this, a historical landscape like MICAS, like the old Ospizio, I think certainly as Maltese, the bastions are very much part of our collective conscience. They're there. Are they there to keep us in? Are they there to, keep everyone out? So I think reinterpreting such a space will certainly give that, will certainly make us appreciate this new conversation with very familiar spaces, but also spaces that are unreachable to an extent, but can now be approached and claimed. So I think that's where I see, some parallels, but of course within a very, very small context.
So what you're saying is it will kind of materially change things because it's connecting with history in a different way.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's opening up new heritage trails for sure. I mean, if you just look at the heritage aspect, or the fact that you've had no access to those seascapes on Marsamxett, I mean, their seascapes are very part of coastal cities, aren't they? I mean, Valletta, Floriana, I mean, they're there because of the sea, because of the importance of the port. That is our interaction with the rest of the world. And certainly, islands might be perceived as insular, but certainly the harbors are where your exchange with the world comes from over the centuries. So, claiming those harborscapes, I think, is also something that is necessary, and also seeing that view and you can view the horizon, and that is certainly one way forward. So I think it is also going to be a place for new placemaking. So I think it's positive.
Of course. And just kind of thinking of the kind of perception of people, how people might perceive Malta and Valletta differently from the outside. Well, Cass, can I kind of ask you to just kind of pick up on this? And, what is the difference when coming into a new place as a visitor and kind of seeing this commitment to contemporary art?
Well, I think I call maybe the Malta effect. We're here at the stage, and other than Georgina, we're all from elsewhere, and we're here to celebrate art. We're here to celebrate Maltese culture, and my first trip was here in June, and I think I was always intrigued by Malta and its, appeal, and I think bringing people here because of what I think as the Malta effect, but then having an institution like MICAS here for them to stay and be amazed and be blown away. And in my experience, I have not been at a place where I was so impressed by how much people knew about their own culture, how proud they were, how at the same time they weren't inward thinking. And islands tend to be inward thinking. And we know that from Great Britain and other islands that have been more successful. I'm intrigued that Malta looks out, in my experience, because I started out in Pakistan, spent a better part of my life, most of my life in America now, and then coming to Malta, it's been incredible how international it is and how people really want. And MICAS is, for me, really, I got involved with MICAS because I don't look at MICAS just as a celebration of Malta. I think of it as a celebration of the international art community. And we're all here to celebrate that Malta is looking outward and not inward.
Mm. Timothy, Conrad, do you have anything to add?
I think one of the things that sometimes is a problem with economics is that it's very reductionist. So we sort of, increasingly societies are sort of, or politicians assess things through fiscal footprints and these sorts of ways, or these impacts. And I think that the thing with the arts is that while they represent only 5% of the GDP in the UK, it's this invisible ether that pervades through everything. So you take this room, for example, and I often, when I'm having dinner with a CEO of a company who says, oh, they're not important because it's only a tiny bit of our GDP, so we don't really need it. But it's like oxygen. They're the big players in our atmosphere, are the tiny, small parts that are fundamental to everything. Take this room, for example. Without the arts, the room disappears, the chairs, the table, the architecture, everything. We're sitting in a field. And so these things are, while they're a small part, they are the sort of major instrumental thing that pervades, like oxygen, that is sort of life force for everything. And one of the problems with the arts is that while it is essential, it can completely bypass these sort of fiscal footprints. Like, you can be an extraordinary writer. My mother, for example, is a very successful, very important writer, but she's made no physical contribution to the economies, but her conceptual contribution to the ideas she's transmitted, and throughout her sort of devotion to her work, is just unimaginable, the people she's affected and changed. And the museum, what it will do is everyone who comes in there will have an experience that will be unique in the way that they respond to a work of art through their history, through their gender, their religion, their sexuality, their love, their trauma. And they will have a different neural pathway experience that I guarantee you from the next person who comes in, and it's incredibly exciting. And that's as Francis was talking about last night, that's the transformatory power of art to affect and change people's lives and create a kind of unpredictable futures, which are positive, is so exciting.
And I think it's kind of interesting, just kind of picking up on the idea of the museum world, and how certainly in the institution I worked for before, and I'm sure it was the same for you, Timothy, there's all of these kind of ways of measuring success, but what you're talking about is immeasurable. And it's very difficult it becomes you're generating a new culture, and it's very difficult to kind of get hold of that and put it on a spreadsheet and in any way. I mean, Timothy, do you agree? Is that?
Well, I do, and I come back to one of the points I made in my talk was that you can build a place, and the place can be wonderful, but if it's not matched with an attitude change, a change of ambition, perhaps, you won't achieve what you really want. And as I look at this photograph of the site, and I think how incredible it is in terms of splicing something new into something old, and creating something that's more than 1 + 1. My hope is that the place becomes magnetic, that it becomes an attractor, not simply to people visiting Malta as tourists, but also to the Maltese themselves. And a symbol of a commitment to contemporary art that's more than a jewel in the city, but something that's lively, that connects Malta to the world of ideas, and in turn gives so much more back to Malta itself. I think that's a really important ambition to have for the institution.
Yeah. No, it's a very exciting prospect.
Things where, when Anton asked the question to Timothy about contemporary spaces, I feel like, Malta is its people, and the people are the culture. So if Malta is putting together a contemporary art place, it's sending a clear message outward that we're very much alive and we're thriving, and we are the center of culture, and we are celebrating it as people. I think that's an important thing about contemporary space.
Absolutely. I wanted to kind of ask a few specific questions of the various panel, but please, all of you, chip in if you've got observations. But Conrad, I wanted to ask you particularly about the artist perspective. And I'm always kind of fascinated how different it must be for artists working with differing institutions. And the extent to which, when you're working with an institution to install your work, how aware are you of the particular nature, their ethos, their goals, the society that they serve? And how does that influence your interaction with them, and also the choice of work? I mean, I know you're probably working with curators and things, but they must somehow change your perception.
No, completely. And I'm not some artists really don't like being given, like, working to commission. They would prefer the sort of white box scenario. But I really relish sort of being given problems to solve, and I really enjoy it, and I like being taken to unfamiliar ground and outside my comfort zone, and so trying to sort of So that's something that I really enjoy. It's kind of sometimes quite miserable along the journey where you sort of almost despair, but then at the sort of 11th hour, you have this sort of eureka moment, and it all comes together, and you find the solution. But I think that I've done a lot of public realm work, and I think that public sculpture can be quite problematic, and it can be sometimes not that successful. I think that the really important thing with public realm or with site-specific works is you have to hang up your ego to a certain extent and take on board the demographic of the people who are using it. It's not just about pleasing a vanguard of the art world, it's about really contextualizing it, taking the endeavor of the building that it's counterpointing, the context, the histories, the palette of the materials. All of these things are quintessential. And the people that actually use the piece, who will see the piece from day to day, not just the people who will turn up at the opening, see it once and then fly off away. It's about that longevity of ownership of people, really the normal people who day to day will inhabit and have that quotidian existence with that object. They're the ones that really matter. Mm-hmm. And so those kinds of decisions are quintessential. But it's great because you have ideas that you would never have had without being put inside those constraints. And it sounds like a sort of some kind of risky nightclub, but it's my favorite phrase is the liberty of constraint. But it sounds like an S&M club, but my engineer and I use this phrase a lot because it allows you to narrow your design and hone your ideas through those constraints.
No, it's very, very interesting, and I think it's the point that you picked up about you're working with two different audiences really. There's the local, which, as you say, is incredibly important, and they're the ones that you really need to talk to. But then there's also the for want of a better word, the tourists, the more kind of transient people that are coming through, and that's a kind of interesting question. Moving on to education. And I was fascinated, Timothy, by the Cleveland it's not really that endeavor of trying to take away that sense of directing people's thought and giving them enormous freedom. And I wanted to kind of ask Georgina first about, we all understand the benefits of education. I mean, that's proven to try and introduce audiences to art. But to what extent do we have to be very conscious of our local audience? And it's not one size fits all. We have to kind of really understand, particularly the education system, the school system, all of those things for the program to be successful.
No, certainly. MICAS is a national project, so we have to address, and it is necessary for us to address the local audiences. Throughout this, for the past 10 years, we've been investing and looking at audience participation. I mean, all public cultural organizations are aware of what we need to do. We've come a long way, but obviously we want our boundaries to disappear. How possible that is, with institutions, is not always that easy to mitigate. But I think in the case of MICAS, it is a fresh start. And if we look at, the origination of the concept itself, it is about inclusion. It is about opening up space and working with communities. We've got very interesting neighborhoods. The footprint itself has very interesting neighborhoods. It's the harbor area. We have schools in Floriana and Valletta. But apart from before I move on to working with schools, etc., I think the most important thing is to ensure that people own the space and see it as somewhere they can interact with. I think the open spaces at MICAS itself will be conducive to this. Of course, having access to the art on site, I think that's also something we are keen to invest in, because ultimately even our collecting policy is about placing art that is always accessible. It's not about, paying to see the art in that sense. So our acquisitions are open to the public. So whether you want to walk around them, simply meet your friends, or take your family for the Sunday walk, or simply admire the view, or walk to the gardens, I think those are creating these socio-aesthetic spaces that are going to be highly accessible. So educating in that sense, I mean, it is up to the public to engage. Obviously, we will do our utmost, because as we all know, we have so many various types of audiences. Of course, our demographics too are changing, so we have to be conscious of that. But the fact that you can offer this invitation for people to engage, I think.
Yeah, it's that idea about the institution being it's a destination.
Exactly.
Because when you've got not only is there going to be the exhibition program, but there's the sculpture gardens, and somewhere to have a cup of coffee, and the views that you get from that that part of the city is quite extraordinary. So I would imagine that even for the uninitiated museum goer, it's somewhere that everyone's going to want to see.
Yes, exactly. So it's the idea that you get an experience. So whether it's the outdoor spaces, whether you're interested in moving and seeing what's in the galleries on offer, but the fact that you can meander for quite a while around a fairly large space for Malta, I think that should be. That should be intriguing, at least, and raise curiosity.
And I think, when Timothy, you were talking about it was at Cleveland with the huge big atrium that was built when you've got that massive indoor space. I mean, with the weather in Malta, we've got a very sizable outdoor space which can be used in very many different ways. And I love the idea about doing this huge big party. Everyone loves a party. But, the thing that you mentioned there, Georgina, was, the different communities. You've got the school community, there's obviously families as well. And I'm also thinking about the kind of ecosystem, too, of the whole art world, and thinking globally. And Wikas, you know more about the commercial sector than any of us here. And I wanted to ask you the question about, with museums and galleries and the commercial sector and the private sector, lines can often be blurred between public and private, and there's sometimes a lack of clarity. And I kind of wanted to raise a question, does this matter? Because I don't know that I really know the answer to that, what I think about it. And can not-for-profits be a way of benefiting, can they benefit from relationships with the private sector if managed properly?
Well, I think I'm doing something completely different, right? Because I'm collecting, I'm curating, and I am art dealing, but most of my art dealing funds my collecting and my philanthropy, which is giving back to museums, getting engaged with museums, and seeing how you can be part of something that's greater than you. I think one of the things I learned very many years ago at the Philadelphia Museum, we had a program called Museum Studies, and which was inviting artists who were living to come into projects with the physical gallery space, the physical building. And I thought it was a genius idea. Richard Long came with buckets of mud, and painted this gigantic mud circle. And it's, I think, the only time, Timothy, that the huge Chagall mural was taken down. And the whole museum studies started out because the Chagall mural desperately needed conservation. And then it became this idea, how do we activate that central wall, which, obviously is not there. But I was just starting out at the Philadelphia Museum and interacting with Richard Long, and was one of the most game-changing moments in my life. It was like I didn't have to write about artists or read about them. I could experience them. And what it fostered was that each artist that came and did a project with the Philadelphia Museum endeared themselves and the institution as well. And somehow you didn't need the dealer to broker that relationship anymore. You had the artist believing in the institution and the institution believing in the artist. So I crossed the tracks to become a dealer because I was in my 20s and in a state of constant agitation, wanted more all the time. So coming to New York was necessary. Being a dealer allowed me full access to art, working with artists, traveling, putting exhibitions together. And what stayed with me is I love producing museum exhibitions and helping artists realize their, goals. I think dealers are very important, but as Timothy was saying, the commerce has completely changed. So I may not be the best indication to be a commercial dealer sitting here because I think the transaction part, while it's very necessary, is the one I'm most uncomfortable with. And I think what's really important is that galleries feel that they have to give back. Dealers feel, my hero for a long time and still is Eugene Thaw, who was an art dealer turned curator. He did the catalog recently for Jackson Pollock. He left his entire belongings and his fortune to the Morgan Library in New York. And I think dealers have to give back, but I also think artists have to give back. And in doing so, the artists take more charge of their own legacies. They become more part. They're not relying on a brokered relationship. And so I'm trying to blur those lines, and I feel very strongly, and I believe in leadership. I was at the Philadelphia Museum for 4.5 years and then wasn't really involved with the museum after leaving Philadelphia. And I ran into Timothy at a dinner for Richard Pousset at Dart, and somebody said, hey, you worked at the Philadelphia Museum, you should meet the new director of the Philadelphia Museum. And Timothy made the museum feel small, but he also got Philadelphia out of this idea that since it's the Philadelphia Museum of Art, it has to be a regional place. Mm-hmm. And I think that formula is very important for MICAS as well, because, if you look inward, you lose out. And I think Timothy would not have made Philadelphia grow. Adding in trustees from elsewhere and getting me involved back in the institution that I loved so much. And I think one of the most important things, and people who know me know that I follow people. And yesterday, Francis gave the most wonderful, it really was a wonderful, heartfelt address. And one of the things he mentioned about wanting to give back to Malta, coming back, and celebrating his success with the community that he grew up in. I think philanthropy is really important. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to sustain artists who are living, obviously because that is the necessary thing we need. But we need artists to get more involved with institutions. And we want dealers to want less and give more. And I think one of the things I feel very strongly about is the whole nature of art fairs has changed. The relationship between collector and artist. And being a collector is really important because a collector is the philanthropist. And so if we are going to create connoisseurship, it cannot be done in 15 minutes at an art fair. Mm-hmm. Where you have, you really don't have the moment to build a relationship with the artist, and to give back. And I think giving back is where it all starts, but we are a symbiotic relationship, an artist, the collector, the dealer, and the curator.
Well, exactly. It's part of a whole kind of landscape that we have to work throughout. But I think that, one of the things that is coming out of that is there's so many areas where a museum has to do a balancing act. So it's between the public and the private. It's between working with, collections and commissioning work from contemporary artists. But another area that I'm very, very interested in, which kind of goes back to the education, is that how do you cater for all when it comes to exhibitions and excellence? Because I feel very strongly that it's the role of museums to develop an understanding in the history of art. There's that adage about, exhibitions change the history of art, collections don't necessarily do that. To the same extent, you may disagree with me, but when it comes to putting on exhibitions, and Timothy, I know this is something that you've always felt very strongly about, it is pushing history of art, understanding, looking at art in a different way, continually evolving our understanding of it. How do you balance that with trying to get fresh audiences in, not being intimidating to people who are not natural gallery goers? And do you nuance one for the sake of the other? How do you manage it?
Well, I guess after 35 years working as a curator and director, I can honestly say I still don't know. I think it's a bit of magic when it happens, and you try to put all the ingredients together to do it properly and to create that magic. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you don't. But I think, to your point, the successful exhibition can have both broad popular appeal and be surprising and engaging and attracting, not simply to your traditional museum audience, but to new visitors. And also make, at the same time, a contribution to the history of art. Now, I'll cite one example very quickly, because this is not the moment to dwell on something in detail. Some years ago at Philadelphia, we decided to do an exhibition on modernism in Mexico, the creation of modern art, and the very specific character and tone it took on in Mexico in the first half of the 20th century, with artists like Diego Rivera, Jose Clemente Orozco, Frida Kahlo, and others emerging. Now, the reasons we did that were various. The museum actually had a great collection of Mexican modernism that wasn't shown very often, so we had a motivation to share that with the public. At the same time, we needed to remind ourselves and also our audience that Philadelphia had been part of this conversation because we'd done the first major exhibition of Mexican modern art in the United States in the early 1940s. So we needed to revisit our own history. But the most important thing was that since the 1940s, two generations of Mexican scholars have really recast our understanding of modern art in Mexico and the contribution it made internationally to the development of modernism. I thought it was a very important story to tell and bring up to date. I also thought that the public would respond to a different way of looking at the modern world and how it emerged in the early 20th century. And it actually succeeded to engender a new conversation art historically about the subject, but also appeal to a broad audience. And sometimes you're simply lucky. Now, the poster image we chose for the exhibition was a painting by Frida Kahlo, self-portrait. She's standing on the Mexican-US border, straddling both, living in two worlds, and professing that in her own autobiographical way. It's a great image. The show opened a month before the American elections in 2016, when the conversation was about building a wall between Mexico and the United States. And people said to me, how did you know to present an exhibition on Mexican art in 2016? And I said it was dumb luck, but it was so timely because it was about the relationship of Mexico to the world, among other things. And people felt it was of the moment. So sometimes you just get lucky.
Yeah. But I think that thing about, of the moment is really important, and catching artists at the right moment as well. When they've just got this, you feel as if there's a real momentum behind them creatively. And going back to kind of ways of appealing to wider audiences is, that there's no doubt about it, but working closely with artists and harnessing their energy for kind of outreach projects becomes a really important element in the overall exhibition and education programming. Conrad?
Yeah, and I think the other an exhibition is almost like a work of art in itself. There's a hope that a work of art will be really successful when there's a diverse interpretation. When everyone sees the same thing in an object, it's probably not a very good work of art. And poetry needs that kind of, that sort of loss of control, if you like. And so there is this, as you say, this magic factor, but there's also the fact that the thing becomes something greater than the sum of the parts. And there is this breadth of interpretation, but a sort of excitement and an energy around the show or the constellation of objects that you've conceived and collected. But the thing will sort of start to take on its own life beyond the constituent elements, and that's, I think they're analogous to each other. A work of art must do that in its own right, but also a successful exposition will do that. But there are these unknown factors like just timing and just the alignment of energies that just make something also just, you can have bad luck or good luck. And the other unfortunate thing in museums, having sat on many committees at the RA, is the horrible red line of, did it make enough sales? And sometimes that's not, sometimes that's just, again, bad luck, as you've got the most extraordinary exhibition, and for some reason not enough people go to see it.
But it's something I get very exercised about, because of course I went through all of that as well. And what's interesting is those measures of success at the time and later. Because now, kind of looking back at the Academy's exhibitions over the past 20 years, that people recognize the ones that have really changed art history. And some of them were absolute flops at the time, and the finance director was wanting to kill everyone who was behind it. So it's very interesting. And I think we need to try and divorce success from, we say that, it's never going to happen, of course.
No, I mean, with being ahead of your time is a lonely business.
Yes.
It's a tough life being.
You're out in your own there.
Being an avant-garde.
History might be kind to you, but your peers around you aren't. We could go on for quite some time, but I just wanted to end before we open it up to the floor by just kind of asking for comment really about, I personally, and I know that it's shared by the wonderful MICAS board and all of the team at MICAS and with our international committee, and Conrad, of course, who feels part of the family, that there's something unbelievably exciting for us, for Malta, about this being a startup, this being something that we are collectively creating. And although it's got a rich history, which Georgina's spoken about on the site, it's also sort of unburdened from institutional history. So it doesn't have a legacy of past donors or past collections. So it's got this kind of fundamental freedom. And because our funding is from central government, the pressures of finance are slightly different. And I just wanted your kind of comments on that, and how we should kind of harness those freedoms and to move forward to create something extraordinary, both here and on the global stage.
Malta does have a burden of great history and great heritage, and I think contemporary institutions right now bring attention to the fact that there's excitement happening now. I mean, just going to Hypergeum yesterday, which is so remarkable and so extraordinary. And I grew up in Pakistan. I've been to Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, But hypergeum, I mean, the fact that, as Timothy was saying, can you believe they did it with antlers and flint tools? I mean, you have that weight of history, and there's no getting away from it here. But to keep starting new things keeps reminding, you know, I would think Malta, but keeps reminding the world that exciting things are happening now. Mm-hmm. And they will look back, and MICAS may be, like Timothy said, when the MoMA opened, it was this brand new spanking place. And now you go to MoMA, and it's like the aging contemporary art space that once was, but they're evolving. And I think MICAS we will look back and we'll say, this is how it started. And hopefully it evolves, and nobody wants to be part of something that's not incredibly exciting. I, for one, got involved with MICAS because it has exciting people who really believe in it. You know, you spend 5 minutes with Phyllis and you just want to do anything she asks you to do. So, you know,
but I think also that you mentioned Bilbao at the beginning, and there's also examples in the UK that just these formulas are so proven. I mean, like with Margate, for example. Yes. I mean, this is a very different case because Malta is a thriving, booming economy, and it's a very successful island. And this isn't coming about because of some drastic measure, but the Bilbao and the Margate Turner Contemporary were drastic measures to try and save failing towns. But the proof is the writing is on the wall. I mean, Margate is now the most successful town in the southeast of the UK. I mean, it's extraordinary, the revolution that's happened, and 100 times the investment has been reborn. It's extraordinary, and I think this is a very different example. But this new institution is going to enthuse so much. A new demographic of visitors, a new cultural exchange, and the wonderful idea of all these young children who will forever be able to experience these things that, as indigenous people on an island, would really not have been able to experience, will be totally transformatory. And Timothy's wonderful example of the Wednesday evening opening for free is so important. I mean, I think every artist, you can ask the question, what was the artwork that changed your life? And we're all artists because we, at some point, saw something that stopped us in our tracks and changed our way of thinking forever. And this will happen on a daily basis to hundreds of people. And that's really, really exciting.
And if I could offer just one piece of advice, which I don't think retired museum directors should do. I think they should shut up and get out of the way, but indulge me for a moment. That is that projects like this, that are funded centrally, that are built slowly over time, away from the attention of the public, often seem to people to be black boxes, something they don't know about, they don't know their way into. And I think it's wise and useful and ultimately the responsible thing to do to start a feedback loop with the public, providing them insight into what you're doing, where it's going to go, opening, not being definitive all the time, but starting a conversation, opening questions, getting answers, responses, thoughts from the public, increasing their understanding, raising their level of awareness of what's going on here, what's going to happen. Now, from a marketing perspective, simply put, that will build momentum and excitement about the project over time. But more importantly, it's an opportunity for you to really start and continue saying, this is your museum. This is a place where things of importance can happen in Malta that you should be involved in. You can never do that enough, and I think if you do it well, you get in the habit of being institutionally responsible, but you also are going to benefit from that open conversation that will hopefully continue and continue to grow after the institution opens next year. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we're getting quite short of time, so. I think we've got a moment that we can just do a couple of questions from the audience. So if anyone has got a question, please. Yes.
So, I wanted to touch on the architectural element, because obviously we're looking at a slide and it says art space, which requires a little bit of imaginative thought at this stage. Could you tell us a little bit about the architectural imperatives and absolutes that you wanted for the space, just to give us a little bit of ideas of what to expect in terms, because we spoke about the emotion of architecture and the aesthetics. What can we expect?
Sure. It's actually quite complex because it's on a historic site, and Georgina is by far the best person on the panel to respond to this.
I think what we need to appreciate is that as a historic site, we needed a sensitive way of reinterpreting the site. So essentially, you're looking at 17th and 18th century military architecture, well, quite brutal but beautiful, and in terms of how we looked at so many other sites. Malta's replete with historic buildings. So this site was just right because it had the beautiful spaces, open spaces that could be utilized for showcasing art, also to bring in people and make it a place that people can experience. But apart from that, the conversation with the historic building had to be very sensitive. I mean, it is extremely difficult to reinterpret a historic site of this sort. So our partners, the Restoration Directorate, have been amazingly supportive. We have a very tight heritage law, which requires you to respect the site. In terms of the choice of building and materials, so essentially we utilized a ditch, the Ritirata ditch, and some little excavation happened there, but respecting the legibility of the site, the design for the building by Hyper Studio, our partners from their Florentine firm of architects, was to respect this legibility and produce a terraced design. So you could still appreciate what the ditch was like, but at the same time, use the sides of the bastions as your enclosing walls, and simply put a cantilevered roof over the top. So that is essentially the idea behind the building. The use of glass to make it as transparent as possible and inviting, but also that it respectfully converse. It has this conversation with the San Salvatore bastion and the counterguard behind it. So, and of course, incorporating a very, very unique arch. This is a skewed arch, which leads you to the view of the harbor. So the arch is important conceptually for us because it is us shouting out to the world and letting the world in. So it's our point where the barriers between what's out there and what's local, what's here, can freely have a conversation. So that's essentially the concept of the galleries.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Just from an artistic point of view, having spent a few weeks working and constructing all these pieces, the mastery of stone, the stonemasonship of these structures is just beyond comprehension, and they seem to sort of the skewed arch you mentioned is just the most extraordinary piece of engineering, which they probably just manage to do in a weekend, but it seems to be completely effortless. There's just every single type of art spanning there and here in barrel vaults. But the skewed arch is a revelation of engineering, where every block is a unique kind of rhombic cube, which is mirrored on both sides, and it's the most extraordinary piece of engineering.
Very good. Any other questions from the floor?
It's automatic? Okay. First of all, I just want to say how I'm really enjoying this talk today. I've come all the way from the land down under as a Maltese Australian artist, or an Australian Maltese artist. My work actually deals with a sense of double belonging and post-war traumatic experience, having lived with immigrant Maltese family in Australia. I guess my big question is, how does my hybrid model fit in as a person who identifies as a Maltese and as an Australian? Because the conversation has centred a lot on looking in and looking out, being an insider and an outsider, and how these interactive spaces, because just listening to Conrad talk about, and I empathise like with the museum model being a challenging space for artists to work, because I see myself as a problem solver in my own work. So as being part of that public audience and the community, how much of the picture do you see kind of building the idea of the museum around the artist, as well as being a hybrid model as part of the local community?
Does anyone want to pick up that question?
I'm not sure if I explained myself clear enough, but basically I'm a Maltese Australian citizen. So I have an identity crisis a little bit.
So
I identify as being Maltese, and
are you asking the question about what, as an artist, what your relationship would be with MICAS?
No, not so much just with MICAS, but just with the general community, as well as institutions like MICAS, and how I fit into that model.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things about MICAS, it's the remit was set very early, that it was an international institution, so it kind of operates locally and internationally, and that's how it's going to operate. And I think that, one of the things that kind of what Cass was picking up on, and Timothy as well, is the globalization of art, that we couldn't have imagined this situation maybe 40 years ago, where we're interested and we have really good information on exhibitions that we can't go to, and that we're able to look online and see exhibitions in America or Australia or anywhere else, and it changes our perception of art. So I think that the whole world is moving in a very different way, but we always have to be conscious of the local as well as the global. I don't know if that kind of gets to the territory you're looking at. And identity doesn't come into it. I mean, a global audience is a global audience. All right. Sure. Okay. Listen, I think we've probably run out of time, so I'm just going to thank very quickly the wonderful panel, Wakas Wajahat, Dr. Georgina Botelli, Conrad Shawcross, and Timothy Rubb. So thank you very much, all of you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Edith, very much for your time. If I can ask you to go back to your places just for one last speech that we have tonight. Thank you as well to the audience. We hope you had a good time, and I'm sure that was insightful to you all. So please join me in welcoming the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry for National Heritage, Culture and Local Government, Joyce DeMeck, for her closing speech, and we can end day 2 with that speech. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. I've enjoyed being here today, and after listening to Timothy Rubb's stimulating and pertinent observations and the animated panel discussions just now, we can appreciate the importance for cultural organizations such as museums and art spaces to be open to change and to align the needs of diverse audiences to their program offerings and institutional ethics. We all recognize the importance of wider participation and the right to democratic access to art and culture. As individuals, we seek to be inspired and enriched by the culture surrounding us, regardless of its diverse forms. Art possesses that unique power that can challenge society and break through boundaries. As a country, we also recognize the significance of art and culture in fostering dialogue, well-being, and their cohesive potential for our communities. Our significant investment in arts and culture is reaping tangible results, expressed by a visible and vibrant cultural scene, the development of new cultural infrastructure, a rise in participation, and the growth of our creative economy. From a national perspective, Malta is positively investing in its museum ecology. We have seen the relocation of our Museum of Fine Arts, MUSA, to its original and revamped site at the Auberge d'Italie. We are also progressing with an ongoing comprehensive redesign and redevelopment of the Malta Maritime Museum. This structural redevelopment will allow the museum to cater to diverse audiences and better present our nation's maritime history, while displaying a vast reserve collection of artifacts previously out of public sight. We're also investing through the St. John's Co-Cathedral Foundation in a new museum for the cathedral that involves a total state-of-the-art refurbishment and extension of the present museum. This includes a new wing to house the impressive, intact set of 29 Baroque Flemish tapestries and a Caravaggio wing. This redevelopment will help accommodate the ever-increasing visitor numbers, facilitate inclusive access, and aid in interpretation and in the displaying of the artifacts. Furthermore, for better equity and representation, we are addressing the needs of the sister island and investing in a new Gozo Museum, which should be finished shortly. In tandem with these, I am delighted to say we are now experiencing the rapid progress of transforming the old hospital site at Floriana into the MICAS. This is undoubtedly a good cause for celebration. As a new not-for-profit public culture organization, MICAS is in the process of establishing itself. Its remit requires it to operate extensively within the global art world context. MICAS needs to establish relationships with artists, international peer institutions, collectors, and galleries to better address the needs of a diverse global and local audience. This type of operation, therefore, requires unique mechanisms to help it operate effectively and efficiently. Therefore, mechanisms such as the MICAS International Committee will institute good governance practices and promote transparency. The International Committee will aid the MICAS agency by ensuring its international initiatives are adequately supported. It will facilitate the creation and maintenance of collaborations globally, including interaction with international peer institutions. I am very pleased that today we welcome Waqas Wahayat and Timothy Rubb, the chair and first member of the MICAS International Committee, respectively. I want to thank them for their philanthropic generosity in accepting these non-numerated posts and for their enthusiasm and support for the MICAS project. Through philanthropy, the art gains the resources and exposure necessary to inspire, challenge, and captivate audiences, contributing to societal, cultural vibrancy and diversity. Your involvement is invaluable, and we are immensely grateful that you are poised to guide MICAS forward with your dedication and expertise as this new committee's members. The establishment of this committee will undoubtedly play a crucial role in advancing MICAS' ongoing development as an ambitious cultural initiative, a dynamic international platform for contemporary art, and a standard bearer for our country's international aspirations. On my part, as the representative of the Ministry and the Maltese government, I look forward to working with you both on this committee. The MICAS International Art Weekend has been successfully brought together the right elements to forward the debate on contemporary art. As the MICAS chair, Phyllis, rightly pointed out at yesterday's launch of the exposition, what is to become is already here. At MICAS in Floriana, it is a significant landmark. It is significant because it showcased a powerful, high-caliber international exhibition by the exceptional artist Konrad Shawcross. It simultaneously unveiled the restored and conserved bastions, barrel vaults, terraces, and courtyards, presently hosting these incredible works of art. The public will now have the opportunity to enjoy these art installations on site and observe the advanced progress of the rehabilitation of the MICAS Hospizio site, while gaining access to historic landscapes and seascapes previously out of reach for decades. This important milestone brings us closer to delivering the MICAS galleries and the grand opening next year. We are acutely aware of the potential of our cultural heritage to attract visitors, but we are just as motivated to widen our cultural offering. We are highly driven to realize our country's aspirations to be innovative, and so are investing in the creation of a high-profile contemporary artist program that strengthens the Maltese cultural calendar. 2024 will usher in an inclusive new public space that will celebrate contemporary art, increase our nation's cultural capital, and widens our offering to the cultural visitor. This is a testament to our nation's international aspirations and commitment to look towards the future, and not just our past. We aspire to give future generations as much heritage as we have inherited. Thank you.
Thank you, Permanent Secretary. And with that closing speech, we have come to an end to all that we had planned for you today. On behalf of MICAS, thank you very much for being with us today, and I wish you a pleasant rest of the day.